Story 1. When they speak negatively about you behind your back, and you hear it from another person, you come to realize in retrospect that the person speaking poorly was never a good friend anyway. Removing them from your life means you can focus on finding real friends. Story 2. My wife and I ended our friendship with a couple when we realized they had no other friends or life outside of spending time with us. They became obsessive and upset if we had other plans or were out of town. Once, they asked what we had been doing, and I mentioned we had been out for tacos while my wife said we had been to a movie. We had done both, but they accused us of lying and not being truthful. When we clarified that we had participated in both activities, they continued to accuse us of being dishonest and evasive. We felt it was unhealthy to be in that situation, so we expressed that we had lives outside of them and were not always available. Their behavior did not change, leading us to end the friendship. They persisted in bothering us for a while, making complaints about our parking and calling in random issues related to my wife's license plate. Eventually, my job required us to move to a nearby town, which helped us distance ourselves further. Story 3. He called me in tears, threatening to kill himself. I dropped everything and rushed to his apartment, only to find him standing there laughing with a stopwatch, timing how long it took me to arrive. I later found out he wasn't the only one he had done this to. Story 4. My best friend from school would never call or message me first. Eventually, after turning 40, I decided to wait and see how long it would take for them to reach out. I'm 50, still waiting. Story 5. I had a friend who was very needy, created drama, and made everything about himself. Eventually, as I got older and became busy with work and school, we stopped socializing and drifted apart. One day, he messaged me and asked if I wanted to hang out again, but he understood if I didn't. I tried to write a thoughtful response but realized it was best to leave it alone. Cutting ties with that drama queen felt like being released from prison. Story 6. I had a friend who always played the victim and drained my energy. Once I cut that connection, it felt like a weight was lifted off my shoulders. Story 7. I had a friend who was a total pick-me girl. She would constantly hit me or push me whenever we talked to the guys in our class. One time, I had a boyfriend who was an absolute gentleman and a total green flag. I found out she had been talking to him behind my back and saying all sorts of bad things about me that weren't true. Thankfully, my boyfriend was loyal, so he told me everything and blocked her immediately. I confronted her about it, but she was unreasonable, so I cut her off. Story 8. I always knew that she was self-absorbed, an exaggerator if not a liar, and overbearing. Over the 15 years we were friends, I let a lot slide. One example being the meltdown she had when I didn't call her first thing in the morning to wish her a happy birthday one year. I was about to dial her number when she called me, shouting that I didn't make her day special. In retrospect, I didn't owe her an explanation, but I did explain that I was at work well before she was even awake, and I wasn't going to walk out of a surgery just to wish her a happy birthday. It finally ended when she imposed herself on my sister. I didn't give her the attention she wanted, and my sister did. This turned into a chaotic situation because during this time, my sister's father passed away, and she was studying for finals. She didn't call this friend to check in for about 4 days, and she had a meltdown that she took to the internet. To sum it up, she showed no regard for what my sister was dealing with, and we caught her in some significant lies. I was done. I blocked her everywhere and haven't spoken to her in about 10 years now. I have no intention of speaking to her again. Story 9. I had what I thought was a very good friend. She and her husband, along with my husband and me, did all sorts of activities together, including global travel with a local group. We would do things with this local group several times a year, but whenever I asked one of the other couples out for dinner or something, they would decline. My husband and I thought there was something wrong with us and that the group just didn't like us. I felt pretty sad about this, especially since my husband would go for wings with a couple of the husbands. Then one day I found out the truth. This person told others that I could only have one friend and that was all I wanted. I wasn't interested in any new friends. I confirmed this with another wife from the group. I immediately cut off contact with this so-called best friend, and she began stalking me. It was overwhelming. I spoke with another friend in law enforcement who knew her about getting a restraining order. I was concerned because her husband was in law enforcement, and I didn't want to hurt his career. One day, she followed me to the gym and confronted me. I told her to get away from me. I didn't want to talk to her. She persisted. So I walked into the manager's office and informed him that she was stalking me. She followed me in, and I told her in front of the manager to leave me alone, explaining that the only reason I hadn't gotten a restraining order was because of her husband. I had received numerous crazy emails from her. She finally mostly left me alone after that, but she would reappear every few months for a few years. I later found out she had done this to several other people too. Story 10. She asked me how I could stand to live where I did because there were so many people of color. Story 11. I made a friend while playing online games. We enjoyed gaming together for a long time. However, my new friend suddenly began expressing anger towards minorities, diversity, equity, and inclusion, and the so-called woke agenda. No thanks. Story 12. Said maybe if I was better with my finances, I would be able to start the family I so desperately wanted. I struggled with infertility. Story 13. A toxic friend did me a favor by cutting me off. This was approximately 5 years ago. We were best friends since grade school. We had a couple of turbulent years in our friendship. Then we formed a cover band together. Much of our childhood involved making music together. I ended up quitting the cover band because he was insisting that we play the songs he wanted. There were other factors, but I communicated that I was looking for a heavier band. He blocked me on all social media and my phone number. We ran into each other at a high school reunion about a year ago and had a brief, civil conversation. We haven't spoken since. Story 14. Looking back, I should have ended the friendship a long time ago. This person made everything about herself and would throw fits when things did not go her way. Finally, 1 year after I had an abortion, she went silent after I told her. The friendship became very one-sided, so I decided to cut her off. Story 15. A friend turned vegan. Fine by me. The same friend became a proselytizing vegan and posted a video on my Facebook where someone talked about the mistreatment of cows. He fully believed that even organic milk and milk from cows labeled as free roaming were equally abusive and argued extensively about it on my Facebook wall. I was foolish enough to allow him back into my life some years later when he barely apologized. He blew his second chance after a month by starting a question with, "So, you as a slur?" When I told him he was being unreasonable, he doubled down, and I blocked him on everything. A few years ago, he contacted me again without bothering to apologize and asked for a favor. I explained to him, in far more polite terms than I should have, that I did not want any contact with him and needed him to leave me alone. Story 16. I knew this guy from the 5th grade, and we always kept in touch even when he switched schools. As we got older, he would routinely ask me for money. Sometimes I would help, and sometimes I would ignore it. I never expected the money back. I was just helping a friend. The final straw was when his mother passed away. He and his sister both received about $12,000 from their mother's life insurance. He texted me asking how much he owed me over the years. By my estimation, it was between $600 and $800. He told me he thought it was closer to $100, so I responded with the most recent times I sent him money, including screenshots showing it was well over $100. He dropped the subject and never brought it back up. Then he bought a new car that he didn't need, a PlayStation 5, and a few other unnecessary purchases. I know I am not entitled to the life insurance money, but him asking how much he owed me, trying to lowball me, and then immediately spending several thousand more than he would have if he had just paid me back upset me greatly. It took me far too long to realize he doesn't view me as a friend, but as a cash machine he can access whenever he makes a poor decision. Story 17. I was 5 days away from being induced. She told us her husband held her at knife point, pretended to take an overdose, and lied to us about leaving him. I provided a statement to the police, but she refused to press charges. He then became aware of my statement and attempted to find out where I live. I gave birth 5 days later. My son was critically ill and passed away. She contacted me 2 days before I buried him, having ignored me the whole time we were in the hospital with my son, and essentially said, "I'm sorry." I blocked her and told her never to contact me again. Story 18. A friend had obsessive tendencies. She was obsessed with certain television show characters, celebrities, and the royal family. For example, she would go out to celebrate Brad Pitt's birthday. She had a depth and breadth of knowledge about their lives that, if it wasn't creepy, was actually impressive. I started dating someone whose extended family was in the public eye due to their career success in the industry she worked in. However, the person I was dating was very private. She took that personally. Without my asking, she located every single one of his social media profiles. I asked her how she did that, and she chortled, "Don't ask." Then she started asking me how every date was, and eventually, "What's the sex like?" That should have been the last straw, but it wasn't. She started orbiting the block where his office building was located, taking the same public transport route we took, and eventually moved to the same suburb we lived in. She said, "Are you moved in with him now? You'll be down the road from me." I eventually shared what was going on, and he told me to cut her off. It was the first time I had ever ghosted someone. Took her months to get the message, and she eventually stopped getting in touch. Such a gross, stressful 6 months. We eventually moved, and she reached out again under the guise of, "Would love to catch up." In a subsequent message, she asked, "I heard you moved. Where to?" Block. Delete. Story 19. It's a long story, but after being close friends for years, he drifted into not wanting to meet up, having moved out of the central city and made new friends with his neighbors. I felt like I was old news. He stood me up or canceled at the last minute so many times that one day I simply replied, "Okay, cool, goodbye," and erased his number from my phone. Maybe I could have confronted him or wanted to talk it through, but I was so tired of the cycle, and it was clear he didn't care about maintaining our friendship. I went on to start a whole new social life and meet more people, so I didn't miss him much. I had already done most of the missing before it actually ended. Goodbye, Alec. Story 20. One scheme after another. Multi-level marketing, used cars, storage auctions. I was always looking for an investment, but I just couldn't continue. Story 21. I met a friend at work in a convenience store. We instantly hit it off and started hanging out after work whenever we worked together. He was great with my son at the time and a wonderful friend. Unfortunately, he developed an addiction to opioids and began to nod off frequently, acting strangely. He also became increasingly rough with my son and hostile toward him, even though my son was only 6 years old. The final straw occurred when my son told me that he had hurt him, twisting his arm while they were wrestling. On the same day, the friend attempted to steal my Nintendo Switch and left a bottle of opioids on my bathroom floor, where my kids or pets could have accessed them. That night, I texted him and expressed that I was tired of his recent behavior and that he was no longer welcome at my home. I haven't seen him since and now have no friends in real life. Story 22. I had a friend. Things were good until she started dating a guy who flirted with every girl he saw. My friend blamed the other girl for his behavior. Then that guy hit on another friend of ours, and my friend slapped her because her boyfriend claimed she was the one who hit on him first. We tried to explain how toxic he was, but she didn't listen. After that incident, I ended my relationship with her because it had become impossible. Story 23. I won't go into detail, but what determined my decision was discovering that I was being deceived. I can overlook many things and move past them, but not that. I could never trust them, and I would always be questioning what was real and what was not. I was entering a paranoid phase where I felt my sanity slipping away, so I cut them off. After a year of distance, everything became much clearer. My mind and emotions were no longer in a fog. It was the right choice, and I believe everyone is better off. Story 24. He was a medic in the Navy. Something must have affected him. He was always religious, but it never came up when we would hang out. Suddenly, he started saying that he could heal people with the power of God. He claimed to have healed someone's broken leg in an instant through prayer. Then he wouldn't stop preaching every time we talked, and he became rude about it, so I decided to stop communicating with him. He nearly changed completely as a person for the worse. Story 25. Not much of a story. They were speaking negatively about me behind my back for months. Once I found out, I took action. Story 26. He was a professional victim with a significant drinking problem and a lack of boundaries when it came to inappropriate behavior towards his friends' partners. I haven't looked back since cutting him out of my life. Story 27. I don't engage in one-sided friendships. Once someone stops putting in effort while I am the one making all the effort to text or hang out, it's over. I firmly believe that friendships, family relationships, and marriages should involve mutual effort from both sides for communication and visits. I also don't like commuting frequently to a friend's house. It should be shared equally. Story 28. I had a friend who became disturbingly codependent on me. Every time I tried to leave, he would threaten to hurt himself or pull some manipulative stunt to trap me. He always pushed for a romantic relationship I never wanted, ignoring every boundary I set as if they meant nothing. Over time, he crossed serious lines, said and did things that genuinely creeped me out, and made me feel completely unsafe. Imagine a 30-year-old man acting like a selfish, entitled child who would cry if he hurt me and then do the same thing the next day. I spent so long feeling trapped, disgusted, and anxious, scared that whatever he did would somehow end up being my fault. He promised he would change, but couldn't even show the bare minimum of respect. I finally cut him off and removed anything that could tie me to him. The relief was immediate. Everything with him was always about me. I was constantly on edge and suffocating. I wish I could have left sooner, but I'm healing now and I'm in a much better place. Story 29. I realized I was always the one making plans. The moment I stopped reaching out, I never heard from them again. Story 30. I slowly faded out of the life of one of my closest friends, not because she was toxic to me, but because she became a very toxic parent. She behaved like a pageant mom, instilling superficial values in her children. I loved them all so much and held my tongue for as long as I could, but eventually, it was either leave or explode completely. That would have served her right, but probably wouldn't have been good for her kids. That's what I tell myself, anyway. Story 31. I was best friends with her for 3 years. We had a lot of fun together, but she could be really mean. She would try to be funny by putting others down, and many people didn't like her because of that. She also bragged constantly and acted like life was a competition. For instance, she would always boast that her father was an entrepreneur, but that didn't mean much. She was still middle class and he wasn't doing anything noteworthy. When we started college, she would often talk about going out drinking and would subtly shame you if you didn't join her. She was very pretty and would also mention how all the guys approached her. Her high ego became difficult to handle, and combined with her mean behavior, I couldn't deal with it anymore. It was definitely better after I ended that friendship. Story 32. She called me a bad name, said she felt unappreciated, and blocked me after I was rushed to the hospital instead of going to see the show with her at the cinema. It was ridiculous. Story 33. Is it strange to read every comment and be understanding because I feel like I have experienced it all? I thought I was unkind for cutting people off so often and easily. Maybe I am the problem. Story 34. He was a decent enough brother until he got hooked on Xanax. He would always be so high that he couldn't have a conversation or even talk straight. He would also be easily irritated and angry, almost as if in slow motion. I had enough of that after hearing him tell his 12-year-old son to go figure himself out because he asked for food. Story 35. She was turning 20 soon at the time and had a romantic and sexual relationship with a 15-year-old. This individual was troubled, had been incarcerated for minor offenses, and had used hard drugs, which I believe is a main reason she was attracted to him, as she would get free cocaine and whatever else she wanted. He sold drugs as well. She also struggled with body image issues similar to my own. She would vent about her problems but would completely change the subject or ignore me when I assumed it was my turn to respond. She glorified her eating disorder and often showed many people, even though she had just met, a picture of herself at her hottest, which was concerning because she looked unwell. Once I started losing weight, as I was her token overweight friend, she made it a competition and became snarky when I weighed less than her. She shouted at me at a party because I didn't want people to judge her, especially since she already had a reputation for being annoying and unpredictable at events. She was openly saying, I will do anything for some cocaine. I don't care if I get chlamydia. As her dealer was known to be problematic at the time, she engaged in questionable behavior with guys at parties and frequently put herself in dangerous situations. I recognized that she probably needs help, which is why I maintained our friendship for so long. But the relationship with a minor was my breaking point, especially when I discovered that they were involved. She sent me a message while I was at work, bragging and showing off the hickeys that this 15-year-old had given her. Story 36. She would sabotage everything in her life and try to play the victim for sympathy from others. My last straw was when she had been talking with another girl online for about a year and asked her out at least 3 times, only to be told no because the girl did not want to date her, but valued their friendship. The last time she asked, she was told to reevaluate their friendship due to constant boundary breaking. She started complaining to me about it and how upset she was. And I said, "What did you think was going to happen? You've been told clearly that she does not want to date you. She just wants to be friends." I apparently became the worst friend ever because I didn't agree with her and thought she should be allowed to ask people out, expecting sympathy from her friends. I quickly checked out of that friendship. It lasted about a month, and this situation occurred almost daily with her. Story 37. This is a recent experience. I had been online friends with someone for over 20 years. She always seemed cool and open-minded, though she could be argumentative at times over trivial matters like football. However, there were never any major issues and I saw no red flags. Fast forward to this time last year, I saw her comment something quite hateful on a social media post. I cannot remember the specific article now, but I clearly recall her transphobic comment, which shocked me. I blocked her immediately. However, it didn't stop there. I discovered she recently transformed her Twitter account into a full-blown hate account dedicated to a certain famous figure. She spends her time there spewing hatred towards this person, arguing with others, and using various slurs against anyone who disagrees with her. I have no idea what happened to her, but I do not regret cutting ties. Story 38. My ex and I hit a rough patch in our relationship, and I needed someone to vent to and talk with. One night, I had a serious breakdown and called a friend who was also a good friend of my ex, whom I had introduced to him. This person went and told my ex everything I confided in her and advised him to break up with me. Despite everything, I gave her another chance and continued being her friend. However, she betrayed me again a few months later, which seriously affected my mental health. I haven't spoken to her since. Story 39. She had untreated bipolar disorder and couldn't keep her emotions in check. She would become excessively energetic when drinking, say hurtful things, and pretend it didn't happen the next morning. I begged her to get help. The mania was difficult for everyone involved. She refused to seek treatment or stop drinking, labeling everyone around her as an alcoholic. Goodbye. Story 40. I used to communicate with one of my exes, but she would only respond when her other options were unavailable. I eventually realized it was chaos to continue trying to maintain contact with her, so I decided to cut her off. What's worse is that she is married but does not behave like it. Story 41. When she became addicted, she tried to pull me into her circle. She was angry when I withdrew, even though she knew I had been addicted to prescription medication in my teens against my will. Then, she claimed I hadn't tried hard enough to save her, not considering that I was working very hard to save myself. Story 42. We were best friends. I moved out after experiencing a lot of mental challenges and moved just down the street. He called me later that day to hang out, but I didn't answer the phone. He never called or texted again. He knew. Story 43. Recently unemployed, my boyfriend had partially moved back to our hometown to set up a job so we could eventually move back. He spent Monday to Friday at his parents' house and traveled 2 hours to visit me every weekend. I felt very alone. I had made friends during the 6 years we lived in the city, but it wasn't until this point that I realized how casual most of those friendships were. While that was acceptable, it was still disappointing. One girl I considered my best friend from the city invited my boyfriend and me for dinner about 2 weeks into my solitude. While there, I directly expressed my loneliness to her and said I could really use her company once or twice a week, even if it was just for a half hour. I suggested that she could bring her kids, and I would be willing to travel to her place. She agreed enthusiastically. I spent the next few weeks trying to meet with her. Every time we made a plan, she would cancel, claiming she had double booked or had forgotten, or she would suddenly be unavailable without offering an explanation. I eventually realized she never reached out to me first. I always initiated the conversation. So I stopped reaching out, and as a result, I stopped hearing from her. Then, maybe a year or two later, she started texting me as if no time had passed, ranting about work problems I knew nothing about and social issues I was unaware of. I followed the instructions for how to tell someone you don't want to be their friend anymore for the second time in my life. Her text response was very flat, simply asking for her guitar back, which I thought was reasonable, and I agreed. However, her husband sent me a lengthy message criticizing me and insisting that I should remain her friend, calling me derogatory names, saying she was upset, and urging me to reconsider. That was uninviting. That was about 5 years ago. She never arranged to get her guitar back, and I haven't heard from her since. Oh well. Story 44. You know those who lack common sense and have a life mantra like no is always guaranteed? Well, cut those people off quickly because your chances of being taken advantage of are significant. Story 45. I had a friend who was in an interfaith relationship, and the guy was constantly trying to influence her to adopt his beliefs. He attempted to convert her while maintaining an active Tinder profile. When we showed her this, she accused us of trying to turn her against him. Story 46. She told me she was having an affair with the coworker she advised her husband not to worry about. The affair started after she married her husband. I warned him, but he didn't believe me since his wife was a Christian angel. A year later, they got divorced and he messaged me to apologize. He also had a paternity test done after she suddenly became pregnant the month I informed him, even though she wasn't letting her husband touch her. It broke his heart to find out a year later that the affair was real and that the sweet baby girl was not his child. Story 47. A charming individual, but somehow would have conflicts with people every few months, including me. She expected me to support her completely, and when I asked for a fraction of that behavior, she would become upset and argumentative. She increasingly became jealous of my genuine close relationships with the other girls in our group. If she was unhappy with one of us, a scene would often arise. She felt entitled to my presence to the point of being draining. I made my boundaries clear, but she would frequently try to sweet-talk me into spending time with her, which annoyed me. I overheard her speaking negatively about me when we were in the same house. She continuously attempted to humiliate me in front of our friend group, among other things. Needless to say, I have kept my distance and blocked any attempts to get close to me. Story 48. We were friends for 3 years, and he used to come over almost every day to hang out. Everyone was right about him, but I couldn't see it. The last straw was when he tried to pull a scam so he could illegally touch my mom. Story 49. I left my last job for my current position. I was discussing with a couple of friends how I took a substantial pay cut to make the switch. I couldn't tolerate the corporate management lifestyle, and my friends are both corporate managers, so I thought they would understand how happy I was to leave that behind. Instead, I was met with ridicule for accepting a lower-paying position. I was shocked because at least one of them has always expressed disdain for being a manager at a large corporate insurance firm and wishes he had pursued a career as a teacher, as he originally planned. My friends and I often joke with each other about trivial matters, but this felt different and unkind. They mocked me for several minutes until I left the call, and our friendship never really recovered. Now, I speak to them infrequently. Story 50. He was only my friend because he could use my weaknesses to compensate for his and feel superior while doing it. He only used people for his own gain and had a bad case of main character syndrome. I stopped answering his phone calls 10 years ago. I didn't block him to make a point. I was choosing not to answer the phone. He still occasionally calls my number. I don't answer. Story 51. I asked my sister how she can be happy in heaven, knowing that I am suffering in agony for all eternity with no hope of escape. She said, "The Bible tells me that there will be no weeping in heaven, so I guess God will make me forget you." I don't talk to her anymore. Please do not ask me to respect your religion. Disrespectful language like love is unacceptable. Story 52. When I was single, I had 2 or 3 guy friends that I would go out with. My best friend would joke around when we met women and got them to join us. He would say something in the conversation like, "Yeah, you're more into young Asian boys," or some inappropriate comment like that. I could see that it made the girls uneasy, and they looked at me strangely. I felt the need to defend or deny his statement, looking at the girls and shaking my head or telling him to stop talking. Mind you, I'm not gay or inappropriate. I tried to keep it light to keep the ladies interested, but he just thought it was funny to say. After he did this several times, I said, "Hey man, stop saying that. It's messing up our chances with the ladies, and you're making me look bad." We went out again, and sure enough, he pulled out that same old line. So, I threw some cash on the table, apologized to the ladies, and walked away. Story 53. Her friendship with a girl who was subtly jealous of me was concerning. She justified that she couldn't be apart from her because that girl has serious issues. The final straw for me was when she became very upset that I didn't talk to her during an event I was anchoring between breaks. She failed to understand that anchoring isn't easy. I had been up since 6 a.m. preparing. This was my final straw. Story 54. My entire friend group decided to cut him off. I'll call him Tom. Tom was introduced to our friend group through a couple of us who knew him, and I actually became closest to him compared to everyone, even though I didn't know him first. The problem with Tom was that he tried to force his way into the close circle of the group, but most in that circle didn't connect with him. Tom had some significant issues. 1. He couldn't maintain a relationship and kept jumping between people. He acted as if he had a difficult life, claiming that his childhood was tough, but his problem was that his parents were strict. For context, my best friend's mother had cancer when he was young, and he and his twin sister had to care for her their entire lives. I have a troubling relationship with my mother, who has caused me significant emotional issues, but I have chosen to distance myself from her. Tom tried to compare his situation to ours, and we found that a bit pathetic. He craved attention and lied to us about many things, even small ones. Our group values honesty, so this was a significant problem. Ultimately, the final straw that led everyone to cut Tom off was that he cheated on his new girlfriend while lying to us about his integrity. Our group absolutely despises cheaters. The sad thing is that despite all his issues, I still believed he could improve. Since I was closest to him, I felt disappointed, but after the cheating, I gave up and cut him off like the rest. Story 55. I had a friend who was very social and friendly. Everyone liked her, but I had a bad feeling about her. I was civil, but I never let my guard down around her or shared things I wouldn't want anyone else to know. The first incident was when she tried to use her sadness about a beloved hometown police officer's death to convince us to stay out drinking with her. We had gone out to have a drink in his honor and were about to leave when she said, "Guys, no, my friend died today." Everyone was disgusted, but we let it slide because we were drinking and she was our friend. The next time was more private. It was in a smaller group chat with just the women of the group. She tried to say that erectile dysfunction was a man's fault and that any man who experienced it deserved it as punishment for something he must have done, hinting at reasons like sexual assault. That's when I realized how problematic she actually was, and I decided to distance myself. Story 56. I've mentioned this story before, but she was a pathological liar. Everyone in our friend group was aware that she did this. Mostly, it was very strange but harmless, so we didn't take anything she said too seriously. We could tell when she lied because her stories could be quite outrageous. We also didn't hang out with her too often, as she was often preoccupied with her own things. Then someone in our friend group committed suicide, and it was a horrible time for all of us. Since this was during the COVID era, not everyone was invited to the funeral. Only those of us who were closer to him or had known him the longest attended. She wasn't that close to him. The day before, I met with the liar and another close friend. The liar kept saying she had been receiving messages from his mother, who had begged her to come to the funeral because she meant so much to him. When she tried to find the messages, they were not there. I got really angry at her, but I didn't show it. She was not at the funeral the next day. I haven't really talked to her much since. Story 57. She was obsessed with South Park and thought that acting like one of the characters from that show was socially acceptable and hilarious in the real world. She spread a rumor that I didn't see my dad very often because he abused drugs and told many people about my polycystic ovary syndrome diagnosis, which was very embarrassing for me at 14. I think you can guess the kind of early teen girl drama that unfolded before I cut her off. Story 58. I asked him if he was a narcissist and he said yes. I put on a face of disgust, finished loading the dishwasher, and never spoke like a friend to him again. I moved out the following week. We weren't a couple, just living together in separate rooms. After this situation, I started reflecting on myself and the reasons I have friends like that. I returned to my home country for the holidays and visited a similar friend. I told him to his face at the doorstep that I think he's narcissistic and that drugs have ruined him, and I no longer wish to stay in contact. I wished him the best of luck and left. After that, the almost entire friend group began questioning what I was up to, and I straightforwardly answered that I believe they are all toxic and that I am not interested in maintaining those relationships. They played the card of, how could you do something like that to a friend and say such things to his face? If this isn't the most respectful way of ending a relationship, then I don't know what is. Long story short, I am very happy after about 2 to 3 years that I don't have those people in my life. I've learned to set boundaries and I get to choose how people interact with me, or they don't interact at all. I wish everyone the same. Stay safe. Story 59. Claimed to have been abused as a child just because they didn't want to be normal. After I cut them off, they had a massive fallout with the rest of the friend group because their alleged abuse as a child was the go-to excuse whenever they acted poorly. Their sister messaged one friend and admitted the truth. It was just a lie. The mother was understandably very upset and ended up kicking the friend out at 26. So suddenly there was no free food, no fun money, and no rent-free place to live. Story 60. She had borderline personality disorder, and nearly every day she would search for conflict and pick arguments with me. I cut her off 4 years ago, and I am still devastated about it. She was the best friend I have ever had. Story 61. I had a friend who everyone cut off due to toxic behavior and generally bringing down the mood. I gave them chance after chance because being alone and emotionally vulnerable is difficult. The last straw was when I had a drink with them and their house was burgled by people they had offended. After I went to their place to take care of their dog, they tried to steal some drinks from the shop around the corner and boasted about it to me an hour later. I told him to leave, but he wouldn't. After the third or fourth attempt, he finally left, and now he is no longer a friend of mine. Thankfully, this experience motivated him to make a real effort to improve himself, and he's doing well with that. Still, he won't be coming to my house for a while. I'm glad he's doing better, though. Story 62. Where do I start? She had borderline personality disorder and exhibited the classic signs, including extremely risky behavior. She dove into new relationships and friendships headfirst, to the point where her entire personality would change when she made a new friend. I was the level-headed one between us, which is significant because I have my own issues. I tried hard to keep her in check, requiring a delicate balance of being a supportive best friend while also giving her a reality check when needed. This was not an easy task, especially while navigating adulthood in our early 20s. She met a guy at work who had just moved to our town. He was engaged and had a child with his fiancée. That's a whole other story. He ended up cheating on his fiancée with her, and she made him call off the wedding the night before. They have been together ever since, going on over 10 years now, I think. That's not the end of it. She moved to his hometown with him and made a new friend who liked to sing and was apparently quite talented. They met a guy at a bar who claimed to be the manager of a famous comedian from our state. He said this girl was going to be famous, and my friend was all in. She started asking for personal loans from her boss and others to raise about $30,000 to record an album for this girl. At this time, she was already engaged to her now husband and begging her parents for an expensive wedding. Additionally, her father was recovering from a severe heart issue. Her mother confided in me that they were struggling with medical bills and didn't know how they would afford a wedding. I couldn't bear to see her parents in that situation while she was acting so irresponsibly. So I told her mother that she was getting into debt for someone who was practically a stranger. My ex-friend called me a liar while simultaneously claiming I was never supportive. We stopped talking after that. It's been about 10 years since we were friends, and now that I'm in my 30s, I couldn't be more grateful that we are no longer friends. We had a strong bond while we were friends, but knowing what I know now, that was just part of the borderline personality disorder that affected our friendship. Story 63. I befriended a person in 2020 at a security job. He was fine initially, but he became very clingy when our contract ended. After that, he called me frequently at odd hours. It became overwhelming, and I had to tell him to leave me alone. Story 64. A female friend, who was never anything more than a friend, became upset when I started dating someone. This was an early lesson about the challenges of maintaining a platonic friendship between men and women. Story 65. I knew a man who always played the victim but would exaggerate situations. The final straw for me was when he revealed that he hadn't informed his partner about his HIV diagnosis and had stopped using condoms. His excuse was that he had been on HIV medication long enough not to transmit the virus, but for me, that was enough to end contact. Story 66. They had always been a problematic person, but they were my childhood friend. I was emotionally and logistically available to them when they were at their lowest, and they exploited it not egregiously but close enough. They then contacted me and a few mutual friends to say they were going to end their life. They didn't specify their location, but they mentioned the intended method, train tracks. This behavior was incredibly selfish. I contacted the police and shared everything I knew, then just waited. We literally could not do anything else. There are a lot of train tracks in the UK. The next contact came a few very scary and sad hours later. They called and flipped out at me, complaining about the trouble they could have gotten into when the police found them. They didn't get in trouble, but their actions could have resulted in a substantial fine. They ignored the fact that my actions had ostensibly prevented them from ending their life. After they finished venting, they asked where we were all hanging out because they wanted to join us for a beer. I declined their self-invitation. They are still a member of my wider friend group, and I am civil when I see them, but I will not and cannot offer them more than the most basic level of engagement ever again. Indeed, I even struggle to have a one-on-one conversation with them and actively avoid it at all costs. I always take such matters seriously. However, this individual had a track record of exaggeration and manipulation. Since then, I have learned the hard way that this is a common trait with certain types of people. I no longer allow myself to get involved with such individuals. Story 67. I had a friend who believed she always knew better than I did. Even when proven wrong, she insisted she was correct. I was getting tired of it. The final straw came when I told her I was in a bad place due to my struggle with depression, and she allowed a friend to respond by saying I was only thinking of myself. My family and friends know me as someone who always puts others first. The second incident occurred not long ago. A friend sent me a picture of a motorcycle and asked for my thoughts. I knew she wasn't financially stable enough and told her it wasn't a smart idea. She was someone who couldn't handle criticism. I feel much better without those two in my life. Story 68. I had a friend through whom I met my now ex-girlfriend. When we started dating, this friend was not happy about it for whatever reason. We had been dating for about 2 years when we had a significant argument. I was really upset about the fight and mentioned it to this friend when I saw her the next night. The following week, my girlfriend texted me, really upset because that friend went around her school and started telling everyone that we got caught having intimate relations, which was not true. In hindsight, I know I shouldn't have mentioned the issue to her. The fight and emotions were raw, and it made me really mad. She just happened to be the next person I saw, so I vented to her. For some reason, I never confronted her about this. It took me a few years, but I eventually cut her off. Basically blocked her on everything. I found out she is getting married now while I'm struggling, so I guess it's true that being a bad person can get you far. Story 69. I became friends in high school and ended the friendship because he was toxic. Years later, I reconnected with him, thinking he had changed. I was wrong. He would randomly say mean things about me in front of friends and others. After talking to him a few times and getting denial or evasion, I stopped communicating with him. He then created some stories and played the victim to our mutual friends, causing me to lose them as well. I am in a much better place now, but that experience was really hard to overcome at the time. Story 70. They only truly bothered me when I was in a group with other friends. We did not have much of a personal relationship. I would not call them toxic, but it is clear that we were not as close as some of my other friends. If he reached out to me today, I would be happy, but at the same time, I am not going out of my way to find them. Story 71. My best friend in college started using drugs and partying. One morning, around 5:30 a.m., he knocked on my front door. I lived with my grandmother during the semester for transportation, so she was awake and answered the door. After telling him that I was asleep, he insisted that she let him in. Eventually, he tried to push past her, but she stood her ground. I spoke to him one last time after that and haven't seen him since. Story 72. Guy was my best friend from preschool through high school. Our moms were friends and worked in the same office when I was a kid. During our senior year of high school, I started dating a girl whose dad was from Puerto Rico. One day at lunch, Guy walked up to me and said, "Hey, I saw you in the mall on Saturday. Why are you hanging around that person?" So I punched him in the face. We haven't spoken since, and I don't miss him. Story 73. Mine isn't a friendly story. However, I cut off my alcoholic mother after trying to help her for 16 years. Now, at 26, I made the decision to distance myself from her a decade ago. When she was drunk, she would say terrible things, including when my father's mother was battling cancer. My mother told me to inform my dad that she hoped it hurt. Since then, I blocked her on all social media and removed her from my life. Since that decision, my life has been much more peaceful. The moral of the story is to never try to save someone who doesn't want to be saved. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.